This is episode 1 of Akendi Talks, deep dives into the people, processes, and ideas shaping UX today. Today's topic, systems thinking in UX, why looking at UX as part of a larger system is so important, and how missing a single connection can cause the whole thing to fall apart.
So what do we mean by that, system thinking in UX? Where does UX fit in the overall picture? Lots of teams and lots of groups are thinking about UX as kind of a thing in isolation. You're doing design, you're looking at UX, you're trying to figure out a way to make the product work. In the hopes of doing that, you're thinking, well, I'm going to sell a lot of stuff and I'm going to have a good business, or I'm going to meet my mandates as an organization. But the design is the most important thing. That's what you see. On the other end, you also see teams, especially in the UX side, spending a little bit less time thinking around technology. Lots of teams think technology is the driver of all design, of all experiences, and there's something to be said for that. But a lot of UX people see technology as either difficult or getting in the way of things, not always helping the UX in the way that they want to. So when you think about that, and those three levels, the business, the design, and technology, you can see them and think of them as systems.
One of the things you've often emphasized that I like, which goes to the essence of systems thinking and why it works, is yes, you have those three parts, but it's the connection between them, which is where people forget or miss or don't think about. And if they miss that connection, that's where you start having problems, or they're just reluctant to look at the connection. Like you said, like, oh, technology is just there because we want to design it and then you guys build it. And that's the extent of the connection. Just follow my order. One of the things that I like, I'll give a plug to a book. It's an old book, Danella Meadows' Thinking in Systems. And it applies to UX, physics, anthropology, all sorts of things. One of the things she emphasizes in the definition is connectedness. She says systems are basically three things. It's made up of a bunch of objects or elements, I think she calls them. Those are connected, and importantly, together, they serve some sort of purpose, right? They're internal parts, some sort of, sub-purpose that feeds the bigger purpose. One of the reasons we think it's really important in the get real part of UX, as Ted mentioned, it's come up tons of times with clients. You missed an object in the system or a connection, or you're not putting those things together to the purpose of the system. An example I ran into 7 or 8 years ago was a company that looked at the kind of classic, we're going to look at the user, we're going to look at the product. They designed, developed the whole product. They spent $500,000 on just the design. They did research between the person and the product, but they did nothing in that broader system, nothing where you do contextual or ethnography or anything where you go out and look at the bigger picture. The Reader's Digest version of the result of that was they were selling to entrepreneurs, and they missed that most entrepreneurs have mentors. So the system of those three things, product, mentor, and entrepreneur, was a completely different system than the super simple system of product and entrepreneur. And it turned out that the entrepreneurs basically said, don't listen to the product, listen to me. Or sorry, the mentors said to the entrepreneurs, don't listen to the product, listen to me. And so the thing didn't work. But they could have designed it for the mentor and the entrepreneur as a system. And so we discovered that after they'd done it, but it was really hard to back out of. If you miss something in the system and it's key, and you've placed all your bets on the system behaving a certain way or people behaving a certain way and they don't, you're in trouble, right? Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons I think it's such a powerful way of thinking, and why it pops up in journeys or flows in systems, so ecosystems or diagrams mm-hmm. of systems. Even if you never heard of those things, there's a lot of stuff you could investigate or good questions you could ask by saying, okay, if I'm trying to develop this product or this technology or improve the business, what's the broader system?
Yeah, you mentioned blueprinting. I think that's an important one. You see that often in teams where I find when the product starts or when the project starts, and the product development starts usually with the business, because there's a reason why you build a product and why you want to do something. It's usually has a business reason or an organizational reason or a mandate reason. And then the business people start to talk to either the technology people or the design people, sometimes both. But I find that they start to step back, which I find always very interesting. You say, if these connections are so important, why doesn't the business stay connected to the product development and the cycles that the designers and the technology is doing? But the business thinks, hey, here you go. I got an idea. We want to build X. Please go do this now. But they don't stay involved in a team, and they don't stay involved from an organizational perspective. But in all the reasons that you just mentioned, things that impact the design, things that impact the technology, but really stem from the business side of things.
Yeah. So that's interesting. One of the things I realized we were just talking about is when you think about systems, one thing you can do is put yourself on the frame of reference of the user or some other external part of the system, the hospital, if you're doing medical stuff or something like that, or even the product. You can think about the product as kind of central frame of reference. But then the other part of the system that's required to be successful is exactly what you said, which is the internal system, right? How are we connected amongst ourselves? So if we have some understanding of that external system and connections and what its purpose is and how we're trying to influence it, and we've got some model of it, right? How do we stay connected through the entire process? Not only of the process of developing, designing the product. I like your metaphor of the islands, right? Once it's out there, how are we staying connected to their journey? Not just, oh, I did my bit and passing them off, right? And again, all that in some sense is systems thinking, because it's about the holisticness of that, right? That you can't just, I solve my little corner of the problem, or everything's fine on my island, or the product works in the circumstances, or there's all these connections and all these complexities around it too. Right.
That's what you see in the different organizations, that the complexities arise, and we are very concerned with the complexities that happen for our audiences outside. But like you said, the internal connections and internal complexities, and that's what you see with service blueprinting. We're trying to get these connections both from the external and the internal parts figured out. And that's another thing that I often see, and where people get confused with terminology, because the word business is used in very different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So you see, for example, in the internal groups, you see business process improvement or business processes. And what people mean is the internal processes that people use to create their own services and products and to deliver those services and products, which is a completely different meaning than when I talk about business design and technology at the beginning. It's going to be something around the idea of having a person trying to meet a business goal, which is usually selling something or reaching people or engaging certain audiences.
Yeah. It's actually that, I mean, I was going to say there's another reason for system thinking, but maybe more practically, a reason why visualization is so important, right? So one of the things, and what we often visualize are how the system's behaving. But when you have things like people using the same terminology in different contexts, like business, a lot of the clarity you can bring is through, okay, when you mean this, what do you mean? And actually just visualizing stuff, right? And go, oh, you're using business in this context because we're trying to make this part of the business work better. What do you mean by the business? Well, all these objects, all these connections at this point in time, and that's how we're trying to improve it. It's interesting too, I find that there's a lot of work being done in what's called complexity theory now. Right. And the Santa Fe Institute is kind of the hub for this in the world. And even everybody at that institute, one of the things that they all agree on is they can't agree on what complexity is. But one of the things that they will agree on is when you start putting humans into systems, it makes them more complex. Right. And one of the things they point out, which is obvious when you say it, is that, of course, people of agency, they're not predictable like an electron, they'll behave a certain way. And so you need all these things we do, creating different personas, because we're trying to go, well, if we can't say exactly how people will behave in certain circumstances, or everyone behaves this way, maybe we can identify some trends and we can do that. And again, a lot of that goes to, okay, if I'm going to say, here's my persona, this is how they behave, here's their journey, and everyone always says, and here's the context. But one of the things I like about systems thinking is it goes, well, I can be more specific about the context. I can actually say, what are the things around me, right? So this, this other family member is part of the context. How do I know that? Well, I actually just drew the system. The family member helps this person all the time because, maybe this person's ill or something like that, and they're using a medical app. Systems thinking lets you start to formalize and visualize and see context. And that's something we're always trying to do in UX, trying to pull out that context and the complexity that goes with it. Right? And figuring out because you can't, in a way, figure out every one of those relationships, you can start to figure out which one of those probably matter in this circumstance, though.
Yeah.
And what data we got. When we get data, then it cleans up what matters in the system, like that mentor example. All this stuff's going on in the system, but you know what? There's really 3 things that are super important, and one of them you completely missed.
Yeah.
So maybe we should talk a little bit about, why think about systems thinking? Why should you go read Donella Meadows' book? I think people should read it, or stuff like it. One of the reasons is a tough thing about UX is there are no universal laws that you can kind of step back on and go, in physics, they're literally like Newton's 3 laws. It'll tell you how a lot of things behave. If you're stuck, go back to them. Where if you're dealing with electricity, then go to Maxwell. If you're dealing with quantum mechanics, well, there's laws you can write down. You can kind of go, I know I can attack the problem, at least to some degree, from these laws. UX is really hard to do that. There's no universal laws of behavior or something like that. One of the things I like about systems thinking is if you're stuck, if you're trying to expand and think about journeys in a different way, or understand how you're going to connect research to actions and solutions, or trying to explain, you can go to systems thinking. It's as foundational as you can get because it's just those 3 things, right? You've got objects. Well, that's what we're trying to figure out. The people objects interacting with the technology objects, interacting with the business objects. So, the hospital, the nurse, the app. I can always go back to that if I'm stuck. And it's trying to understand what are the connections, which connections matter, and connect that to a purpose. The business is always about or an organization has some purpose or mandate. We're going to teach you about process in UX, but there's less we're going to teach you about concepts, because we kind of rush people through. And I think it's a fundamental concept that's going to help you with other concepts like journeys and stuff. That would be my selling point for going to read Donella Meadows' book, and it'll have practical use. My friend Jennifer Fraser did a project that wasn't really about a persona, but she used systems thinking to make a connection that was helpful for the client.
Now, the only thing I would add to that is for some people in UX, on the research side about humans, because people have a behavioral science background or they're designers, when they hear the word objects and systems, they may turn off. And that's always unfortunate because the concepts are not difficult, but just the words feel icky to some people. I always go in my mind, so if you replace the word systems with people, or with interactions or stuff you do, the context of where you do it becomes more understandable, because you're just trying to do X in some environment. In effect, he's working within that system, but you don't call it an object, a system itself, because that can be eternal for some people. So I just replace them with humans, activities, goals, motivations, attitudes, anything more related to the human aspect of it, and you're going to be fine. You are doing system thinking in that case. It's just as a bunch of different terms.
I think that's, regardless of the terms, I 100% agree. You are doing systems thinking. That's why I find when people read it, I've given it to people like the people you've just described, the Donella Meadows book, which is why I think it's such a great book to read. Aside from that part I talked about, the elements that are connected with, she really doesn't wallow in the kind of engineering thinking, right? It's much more human. She gives human examples, human-based kind of thinking, and it doesn't have that icky, feels like I'm reading a computer textbook, which for some people is great. They absolutely love it. That's how they want to think. But for some people, it's, no, I want to talk more about the people side of things and use that terminology.
Okay, let's wrap it up there. What we wanted to leave you with is this. UX doesn't live on an island. It's always part of a bigger system, and if you don't think about the connections, things break. If you've got questions, comments, or stories of your own where systems thinking made a difference, we'd love to hear them. You can continue the conversation over on Akendi's social media or give www.akendi.ca a visit for more information. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next episode of Akendi Talks.